My name is Gerard Kelly and I was born in Greencastle in 1961. I've lived in Greencastle all my life. I stayed at school full time until 17 and got out of it as fast as I could to get to go fishing. And live in Greencastle now with my wife, Deirdre, and 5 children. And have been earning, hoping and working and beside the sea and trying to earn my living from what's happening on the sea since I left school in 1978. Yeah, well, I would really like to go back to the start because the first time I went out fishing was with my father, and that was on the 15th of July 1965. That was his birthday, and I got out that night as a special treat. I was 4 years of age at that time, and I can remember the people that were there that night. Not any of them left anymore, unfortunately. I can remember how much we caught. We had 28 salmon. It was a great night. I can remember being sick and been sick all night, and I remember all I wanted to do was get away the next night again. So the treat used to be here, if you did all the work about the house and did all the things that nobody else wanted that would do, you got to go to fish on a Friday night, because at that stage we fished salmon Monday night, Tuesday night, Wednesday night, Thursday night, Friday night. So school was over on Friday and you got to go to fish, and then later on in the summer you could go any night because the school holidays were on. And I could have been out not only with my father but with other fishermen. You just went with whoever, and somebody always looked after you, and it was good to hear the stories, and they would lie at night telling stories. And the worst thing is, after a few years you could tell the same stories because you'd heard them you'd heard them all before. It was, I suppose, all I can remember, why I think it's so nostalgic, is that's when I was growing up as a young boy, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, into my early teenage years. But that's all there was to live for here, and it was great. We used to do well collecting empty mineral bottles out of the boats. There was money back on them, and we never looked for pocket money. We always earned our own, and we were been working around the boats during the day when school wasn't there. And lots of times you told the teacher you had to go down and pump out a boat if it was school time, and you at least took a good half day. So, but there wasn't much happening at school at that time of the year anyway. So, but it was where everyone homed in on. All the lads, you know, had jobs on boats and pumping them out and reading the nets and getting water for them and getting diesel in for them and things like that. And it was a nice place to grow up, and it was nice people about the pier, and men came from the hill behind us here, and they came from the hills of Glengad, and that was my childhood, and I remember it fondly. But most of the lads that I remember growing up with, the fishing had improved a bit, the facilities improved a bit, and the boats were became a bit bigger. I think my father was one of the first to get a boat around about 50 feet. That was probably in the early 60s. And so that size of boat, maybe work became a bit more regular, and instead of just depending on a living from Greencastle, they could have ended up going to Kellybegs for a few months when things were bad here. So then there was lads then able to stay, and most of the lads that I grew up with, some of them ended up owning boats of their own. Some of them are still now boat owners, and some of them did a few years, maybe came ashore and got involved in processing. But it was a great jumping off point, you know, for people to set up in business. And it was a great, how would you call it? Like an acorn for people's lives, you know. You started off there and everyone sort of grew from there and maintained a presence in the area. That's gone. That's gone now. I actually would have been fishing as a crewman on the boats from I was about 12, and that was tough out going, you know. But suppose when you're young, you didn't really get abused by the older men. They did their best to sort of, you know, you mightn't have been that good out at sea, but maybe you had everything ready in the evening and you had everything right, and all they had to do was go. But the first 2 years I was a bit late for the job, you know. At 12 years of age, we would have shot the net twice, and that's probably 2 miles a net. There was no hydraulics or anything at that stage. in the early stages, I remember when I was 14 one night, the skipper wasn't well, and I took the boat out myself and another lad who used to work Farraige. So that was out in the dark, no lights, no nothing, you know. But at that stage, I'd been out done often enough to know sort of what to do. So I'd have been skippering the boat then from 15 onwards, and as I say, left school at 17, and then I ended up skippering an old boat that we bought from an old Danish boat. Around about I was about 19 at the time, and that year my father wasn't that well, and I ended up skippering that out of Kellybegs and Greencastle. So many a time you started off your day wondering, you know, what's going to face you today, what challenges is there, what opportunities is there. And I'll say in hindsight, probably a wee bit too much for a lad at that age. You know, another few years maturing wouldn't have done any harm, because you just burn yourself out far too early in life, you know. But stayed at that for a few years. Ended up buying a boat then myself later on, and sold it. I was kind of nervous of the way things were going with the EU fishing quotas at the time, and I decided that I started doing some processing of fish and handling fish and selling fish. For my brother, he had a boat as well, he had 2 boats, and got involved in packing fish for the Spanish market, for the co-ops and a few local people that had that handled their own fish. So I got involved in buying and selling, got involved in travelling the continent, seeing what trends and what demands there was. Discovered that like shellfish was big business. When I say big business, sometimes some of it is low quantity, high value, and others are like the one I looked at, which was more mussels, which was high quantity, lower value. And looked at the way that was been done in other countries, visited them, went out in the boats, and eventually started it here ourselves in 1997. And while there was some aquaculture in other parts of the country, there was none here, and it was mainly due to jurisdiction. When you relay, for example, what we were doing and what other people were doing at that stage, they were catching these small mussels called spat at places in the open sea. Now, it could have been outside Greencastle, it could have been outside Howth in Dublin, it could have been outside Lambay Island or Wicklow Head or Rosslare, places like that. So around about 97 we found a lot of small mussels just out here, and we decided that, when I say we, the general community decided, look, let's have a go at this. Now, late 1997 is the time that Fruit of the Loom was closing down, and there was a big a think tank on, you know, what can Inishowen do to survive, and what can it do to build an industry that someone else can't move to another continent or another country. And I thought the mussel thing would be really good. It was untried here, it was high risk, but you know, the fact that the seed was close by that year, it was an incentive to give it a go. So we hired boats that time, because to do that job you need a purpose-built boat, and there was some purpose-built boats down in Wexford at that stage. And in general, different fishing families from the area gave it a go. And as I say, I mentioned jurisdiction earlier on, you'd have been feared because of the lack of jurisdiction. You didn't have licensing, and if you didn't have licensing, you didn't have the protection of the stock when it went on the ground, so it was liable to it was liable to be stolen. There was a threat of it being stolen. But because there was a community effort into doing it, then there was a community insurance almost. Look, enough of us are doing it, we'll be honourable amongst ourselves, so we don't have to fear anyone in our group. And thankfully we've managed to, that business took off, there was no stealing, and everyone was able to go ahead and try bits of ground, and it turned out to be quite successful. So 97 was the first time we started it. I bought a purpose-built boat in 1998. Now, let's say purpose-built boat, it was 50 years old. It was being used for that purpose, perhaps purpose-built isn't the right term. And we had a good lot of success, and the main reason for success is that We did a lot of work on marketing in France. We had to break in to an existing market. We had to prove that we could produce the product. We had to prove that we could deliver it when the factories there and the processors wanted it. And we had to prove that we had continuity. And in all of those, we achieved it pretty well. So in 2001, I ended up buying a bigger boat, which was purpose-built. It was only about 20 years old at the time. And then in 2004, we put an order for this boat that you see here. This is a purpose-built muscle boat. There were 7 new purpose-built muscle boats granted by the Irish government at that stage, and the purpose was to increase the production of mussels on the in Ireland. And thankfully, I was selected to be one of those. We had a good track record of doing the business and performing, and we were delighted to get it, and it worked very well. It's a bespoke vessel and built purposely to my requirements, and that's what we've been doing up to about 2010 or 11, and things got a bit iffy after that. The quantities of seed that we collected were becoming very low, unpredictable, and we had asked the government to look a few times at access to that, because there were Dutch guys registering vessels in Belfast and accessing the resource, and the vessels didn't have fishing licenses. They were working under a supposed agreement which didn't exist, a thing called the Voisinage Agreement. And Voisinage Agreement was supposed to have been made at the London Fisheries Convention in 1964. It's quite clear that it never was. There's an annex of what conventions were made, and that is not on it. We raised the issue from the time we were almost finished building the boats with our government until we ended up in a Supreme Court decision, in, this time 2 years ago, October 2016. And thankfully the judges said there is no such agreement. But what was even more surprising was that part of the frustration we had was the department were not classifying mussel seed, which is what's called a sessile species. They sit on the seabed, they're attached to the seabed. We're catching them in the bays of Ireland and inside the 6 mile zone of Ireland's coast. They told us that we don't class them as a natural resource, and in case anybody tells us we're wrong on that, we don't own them either. So at this point in my life, I'm disappointed that we have people representing us who are willing to disown something that's attached to the seabed in our bays, and I feel that all my future investment and a lot of my past investment and life's work is at the mercy of someone with that mindset. The Deirdre is 40 metres long. It has about 1,000 horsepower, it's got twin engines, and it only draws about 5 feet of water. So it's a big flat bottom vessel, and the reason it is so flat and so shallow is that then we can go on to shallow areas to be able to relay the mussels. There's a bit of a compromise between being shallow enough to relay the mussels when loaded on areas of the Loch Foyle here. Compromise between that draft and the draft you need to go to sea, because we have to sometimes come around Rathlin Sound, which is quite a poor area. It's 9 metres wide. It can carry about 200 tonnes of mussels. It's purposely built for mussels, and it is no good for anything else. It is very effective for mussels, and unfortunately most of the boats that are built for mussels are only any good for mussels. It cost €3.4 million in 2005. What it's worth now, I am afraid to think, because we kept it in really good order, but I would say that the total production of mussels this year is 2,500 tonnes for the whole of Ireland. I should be producing 2,500 tonnes. The plan for this vessel would have been producing 3,000 tonnes. And we use the same vessel. What we do is we fish 4 dredges. They've changed now. There used to be dredges. There are more actually box nets now. We fish 2 box nets each side, and we bring the seed into the boat into 2 holes, and then we can relay them out through the bottom again onto the seabed. And when they're growing, we lift them again, we wash them, and we put them into ton bags aboard the vessel. We can probably do about 15 tons an hour. And so the mussels that are mature and grown, they go into ton bags in the boat, and we could land probably 2 to 3 lorry loads. But to some extent, it's a bit of a hybrid, because to get the small seed, you behave as if you're fishing. The only thing is, when you go out to the open sea and you find them and you put them into the boat, you don't land them in the market like as if you were catching another fish. You take them, you put them in the seabed, and they're there for 1.5 to 2 years. So there's a long lead-in time. You actually have your third restocking on a cycle. You have your third restocking done before you have your first harvest. We tied up in port here, so this is now end of October 2018. We tied up here in mid-September 2017. We did 3 days at sea in 2017. We did 2 days at sea in 2016, and there were 3 years we weren't out at all. So it's very difficult for a fisherman to say, look, we need to stop doing what we're doing. You know, you can't go out cutting acorns with chainsaws. You know, if you're going to use a chainsaw, you have to wait until the tree grows. We want the mussels to get a chance to recover, and for some reason or other, our department believes that every mussel must be fished every year. They seem to think that mussels do not overwinter to the following year, whereas our experience in the early years when it was good, all the mussels we were catching were from the previous year, and they'd overwintered, so they had done a good bit of their growing before we lifted them. So much so that we could put them out in a year after relaying. Now, if we had them, it would be 2 to 2.5 years. So the other thing with mussels could end up like a pest. They should be so productive, and if they would only leave some. But the plan is fish them all, get the figure up this year, make it look good. Next year, different story. But next year has always been the same now for the last 4 or 5 years. Very, very little seed. When you ask someone to do a bit of conservation, a lot of people say, do conservation, but in the meantime, you do the conserving and I'll go and do the catching. I want to lead by example. I want it conserved. I'm staying in. I even wrote to our department this year and said where there were some mussels, I don't believe they should be fished, and I'm not taking part in it. You know, so if no one believes you when you're going to all the cost of of denying yourself the income, then who are they going to believe? If I was out fishing and taking it and saying, yeah, we need conservation, but not just yet, you know, Lord save me, but not just yet. There's no ambiguity in my point. It needs to be stopped. Fishing needs to be stopped for a year or two. It needs to get a chance to recover. And I think then we could have a very, very good industry, employ a lot of people. Like when this was going good, there was at least 20 people depending on this operation. They're gone. It's tough when you're on. I walked into a room one day in a courtroom, and there was a couple of lawyers on our side. There was 3 to 4 on the other side, and there was about 10 people from state agencies. And all of those people on that right hand side of the room were there to fight for the rights for foreign fishing vessels. They were there to fight for giving away a natural resource and even denying that it was a natural resource. And I can't understand why the lad that left school at 17 was in to try to protect the natural resource, protect sovereignty, protect the rights for Irish fishermen. I'm still lost as to why I had to do that. I'm lost as to how I saw a senior counsel for the Attorney General standing up and saying, mussel seed is not a natural resource, and even if it is, we don't own it. I hope I live long enough for someone to explain to me the purpose behind that. Cod, for example, is migratory, okay, and cod could be like the geese. You know, if it's flying over us today, you know, is it our goose? There may be, you know, I wouldn't like to say it's beyond reasonable doubt that that's our goose. Now, when fish are swimming through our waters. There are fish. But a mussel is attached to the seabed. You can't get anything, more cut and dried than that. And when some of our quotas are in shared waters, well, there's a question as to, they belong to whoever catches them. Okay? When I'm talking about an exclusive area of the Irish coast, where there should be no boats, only Irish vessels, and where the mussel is attached to the rocks on the seabed, on the shore of the seabed, if we're disowning that, what chances do we have of making a claim in anything? I mean, what chances, if the same mindset was applied to our oil, they just turn and say, well, somebody turned up and started pumping it. The answer was, these vessels turned up. But like, if I turned up in lots of places, I know where I turned up next. And that'll be in court as well. For the life of me, I cannot understand the rationale or the thinking. I mean, the Irish government and the EU put a lot of money into developing aquaculture in Ireland. And in the mussel sector, which I'm in, to develop a mussel business, you need mussel seed. So what do? Give it away to someone else? It just doesn't add up. This time 2 years ago, October 2 years ago, the decision was given in the Supreme Court that we were right. The arrangement, this voisinage thing, was not an Irish law. That mussel seed is a natural resource and it cannot be alienated from the Irish people without law, which was happening. So when all those things that happened, they were all illegal. What stage is we at now? We were before a court in June and July of this year, looking for a declaration that the committee that allocated mussel quotas were constituted illegally. So we're waiting on a decision on that, and we're also waiting on damages for those last 10 years. Since this boat came, there has not been one mussel allocated to this boat or the project under which this boat was built. And that year we applied directly to our minister for an allocation for the boat and for the project. You got to remember, the boat is part of a project that we put to Europe, and first of all the Irish government advertised, is anyone interested? Yes, so we responded. We went through a scoring and selection process. We were picked. The aim of the project was to develop the mussel industry in Ireland. It was to be developed to about 40,000 tonnes. So the first year we said we ain't going to write to this cross-border SMAC thing. It was called SMAC Seed Mussel. The change from advisory to allocation to the AAA. I can't remember what the other A was, and I saw a minister for a meeting, they weren't sure what they were called either. So anyway, so we applied directly to our minister, who at that time was Pat Gallagher, and he told us, provision is, everyone should be allowed to apply to their own minister. That should be a given, and we asked him to assess them. By him assessing that means his staff. What we didn't want happening was it had been sent to the SMAC thing. He refused to process it, and the first or second day out then we were arrested by the Irish Navy and taken in. Now at that stage we were taken in for not having an allocation, but at that time it wasn't illegal not to have an allocation. The following year it was illegal not to have an allocation. So from 2005, before we went to court, we still got no allocation. And in 2018, I applied again, and no allocation for this project. But the first thing has to change is the attitude in the people who are designated to look after us. That's the civil servants in charge of fisheries. So if we're to give people a future in fisheries, it has to be something that comes from the fisheries department. And it has to be something that is sustainable, and not just something that is a flag for them to fly. We want something that's lasting, not just some type of dressing. There was guys here who built new boats a few years ago. A few years ago, unfortunately, is the year 2000. was a whitefish renewal scheme, and some of the men from here built new boats, and they were going to catch 70% of the catch was to be non-quota species, deep water species. Before those vessels got off the slipway, brand new, we ended up with almost zero quota for those species. I like to see a department that's forward thinking, that will engage properly with people. It's not afraid to lose fish, because losing fish isn't so bad. Losing livelihood is terrible. And the civil servant will never lose their livelihood. I would like to see things dictated locally rather than from Europe. Like fishermen in the UK definitely voted against Europe in the Brexit vote. Ireland is probably too small, to be an independent country, and we farm out our governance to Europe anyway, so it's handy. We always can blame Europe if something happens. But something went wrong in our access to the EU, and everyone is afraid to look at that again. They're afraid to look at the allocations we got of our own resources when we joined the EU. Ireland loses about 700 million to $1 billion of seafood out of its exclusive fishery zone every year to European fleets. We don't even get recognition from that on our balance of payments with Europe. We don't get any recognition for that when Department of Finance is looking to see what is fishing worth in this country. Because if they included what is taken, then the value of fishing would be more respected. And if it became more respected, they might see, look, that's an indigenous industry, it's not a multinational. If we could get it going, it'll stay here. Now, even at the moment, people are starting to realise we're dependent too much on multinationals. And in fairness, we couldn't live without multinationals. Now, I don't know what our tax rates would end up being if we didn't have, the taxes from the multinationals. But you have to plan that the multinationals may not be here forever. And we are an island nation on the western side of Europe, and there's no one between here and America, and yet we ain't allowed out to fish. That thinking has to change. And I feel that we're under a serious threat whatever time Brexit happens, because there's going to be so many fleets displaced from the UK waters, including Ireland, and they're going to be then placed into Irish waters. So I think post-Brexit we have to pull the zonal attachment card and say, look, if you recognise that the UK is entitled to its fish or its natural resources because of zonal attachment, so are we. And we need a much, much bigger share of them than we're getting at the moment. So what's the future? To have a future now in fishing, you need to be able to have a right to take the resource. And not a diluted right, but to some extent an almost exclusive right. So I think that's how the people from Greencastle, Malin, Glengad, all that coast, the whole way, actually the whole west coast of Ireland and the east coast of Ireland, we need to be able to take in more of what belongs to us. And while the department officials may think those are European fish, I ask the question, well, how did they become European fish if it wasn't with us joining Europe? And then I would ask the question, and if theoretically we left Europe, do we leave the ownership of the fish behind? They're our fish, they're in our waters. That's long established law.